There was a lot of discussion on IoT and AI. I mean, these are not new topics, right? If a lot of thought leaders are to believe AI will take away a lot of jobs, improve processes, IoT is already, Rajesh Batra has given us a good idea of what IoT can do in the hospital setup. With that, I would direct my question to you, Doc, because Manipal is close to my heart. I studied at Manipal. Tell me, in a practical setup, you're a physician, you're a nephrologist who's worked in the UK, worked in India, you worked at the Royal College. Is it really helping you? Is IoT, AI really helping you improve clinical decisions, or is it something that is good to have, but physician knows best?
Right. I think if you'd asked me this question about 3-4 years back, I would have said it's good to have. But I think with the experience in the last 1 year, which we've had both with IoT and AI, I think this is something which is the future of medicine. It is not futuristic medicine, and by that I define that healthcare needs to be accessible and transparent. I know you had this discussion about transparency and data security. I was itching to get into the debate, but I refrained myself. But what I'm trying to say is that AI and IoT have actually made differences. To put it in context, Manipal is the second hospital in the world to be using IBM Watson for our oncology services.
Correct.
We've had more than 1,000 patients who've used or who've been through the Watson system. And what we're looking is concordance, doctor versus machine. We are the first hospital group to come up with this peer-reviewed paper of these 1,000 patients to see how is the concordance between man and machine. Until we publish it, it will remain confidential, but I think if I can give you a sneak preview, what we're saying is decisions which a machine makes corroborates what a doctor does.
Okay.
So I think that is what we're looking at, especially in AI.
So that's a very interesting point, Doc. And I want to shift to Shiva here. So you are obviously associated with Manipal. You've been associated with so many hospitals. And we had the brief discussion outside about AI. Do you see a lot of corroboration between how AI, IoT helping improve clinical outcomes?
So I think if you look at our experience in Philips, I believe it is the trajectory, it is the direction. If you start looking at the role of IoT in enabling care, particularly if you start looking at the practice and process aspect. So do you look at adherence, do you look at guidance, do you look at how care is being delivered? And if you start looking at the space of elderly care and all of what we are doing in Philips, you really look at the fact that IoT and AI can make a significant difference in what can get done in its application. You have a lot of data that is getting generated from the home, and you can look at some of the past speakers also speak about it. Now, the ability to keep the patient at home, analyze that data, and then draw the right kind of inferences is clearly a trend that we are seeing. And to that extent, I can certainly say that. When you start looking at imaging and radiology in particular, and the process of corroborating what a radiologist does, I think there is opportunity there too. And that's something that you'll see also happen in a big way. That's what I can potentially anticipate.
Oh, excellent. So you brought up home healthcare, which is obviously where Rajesh Batra and the other thought leaders think. I remember Dr. Ashwin Naik said hospitals won't exist except for critical care. So John, you obviously you're a startup. You heavily work with IoT through Maya and Plakal Health. How are you seeing this scenario emerge?
We see ourselves more in the wellness space than in the health space. So it's more preventive. We don't label the product as a medical product. It's labeled as a health product. What Maya does is helps women track their reproductive health on their smartphone. We launched 4 years ago, and we had at about 6.5 million downloads. So we help women track their cycles, related symptoms, and give them actionable insights around that. For example, start of the next cycle, when is the fertile phases, and so on. We've been fairly successful in doing that. In the starting phase, it was just the app. We are now exploring models where we integrate with wearables and automate a lot of the data that we get and make the insights a lot more actionable. We see ourselves as a preventive/wellness product, right? So our learning has also been along the way. In the case of women, reproductive health is a leading indicator of their overall health. A lot of issues that they have first appear as symptoms when it comes related to their cycles or the symptoms around it. For example, take issues like PCOS or PCOD or even thyroid. It first shows up in how the cycles fluctuate. Now, can we use that data and make sense out of it and warn the users? But it becomes actionable, we still think, at least today, you still have to rely on a medical professional to make the insights actionable, right? We don't recommend any action items to the users based on this data. We just warn them that there could possibly be a problem and they should seek out medical help. So we see ourselves much earlier in the cycle. And when there is a problem, we warn the users that they should seek out medical help. So we don't see us replacing doctors.
I got it.
Right?
You're trying to play it safe. You're sitting next to Doc and you just want to make sure that, you don't rub him off.
It is what it is today. Right?
I'll quickly interrupt there because, a couple of weeks ago, there was this hackathon, medical device hackathon, which happened at the Indian Institute of Science. So I was one of the curator and the jury members. And one of the problems which they were given is about identifying depression and, how you're using wearables and things like that. So the fundamental issue with technology companies doing for healthcare is that they feel, okay, this is a solution and you have to use it to get that solution sorted out. But from a doctor's perspective, there are a lot of pain points and they need to address that rather than fitting a solution into a problem. So you look at a problem and then create a solution. So one of the hackathon people said, okay, depression is a major issue, I'm going to get into that. So they check the pulse. If the pulse is variable, there is an indication for depression. I was just telling him that reminds me of these 1990 Hindi films, Manmohan Desai films, where the doctor comes and checks the pulse and say, Mubarak ab maa banne wali hai. It just doesn't work like that.
So coming to you, Ramchandra, from your personal experience, you've been working with healthcare. Do you think technology providers have got it the other way around?
Some of them might be. We don't take that view. I think we are working with Manipal very, very closely at the moment, trying to get the solution that we have built with years of expertise that were provided by, because Watson Oncology specifically is a product that was trained initially by MSK, Memorial Sloan Kettering, right, for cancer treatment, diagnosis and treatment. We take healthcare into these pieces, oncology and various other chronic diseases per se, right? And we try to build solutions on those spaces. We have been fairly successful in saying, here is an acute problem that we are trying to solve. We have not gotten the other way around. While I think it's a fair assumption for a doctor to say it's been soaped down on my throat, right? And we have been challenged with years of oncology treating expertise, saying here is a machine which is going to now tell me what am I going to do with this patient. That's not true. We are actually augmenting, if you call it, the human brain, because for a disease like cancer, the ratio of, you call it, the oncologist to patient in India is about 1:1600. So theoretically speaking, when a patient walks to an oncologist, they have less than 15-20 minutes to look at all the reports, make a decision, and cancer is a disease which is where your first treatment has to be the best treatment. You don't have time to lose.
Okay, I take your
Right?
point. It's a good point. We just hold that thought because I'll come back to you more when we talk about AI in particular.
Right.
So Sanjeev, you're in the hot seat, right? I've heard you at other conferences, and you're very passionate about the startup space and the work you're doing with not only IoT, with the entire startup ecosystem is tremendous. NASSCOM has been the flag bearer. How do you address this problem? Should the product fit the solution or the solution fit the situation? So how do you instill that in all these incubators, all these startups that come to you for mentoring? How do you instill that?
There are a lot of startups that are coming up, and we deal with some of them, and there's some of them we don't know what also, and we're still in the process of reaching out. And what we are looking to do right now is to bring all these players together. I in particular probably, I'm dealing with industrial startups, I'm dealing with healthcare startups, I'm dealing with startups on the transport side, so a whole spectrum. But what we thought is, the best way to address this issue is to bring all these people together into one ecosystem where the startups, the consumers of the technology, which is hospitals, some of the medical device makers, some of the enterprises, the technology makers, like companies like Philips and Siemens and all that. So all these people should come together into one, onto one, a table or a platform or a meeting where all these issues are discussed. They have to develop something which is needed by the hospitals. All hospitals know they need to use more of technology.
they know that, but they don't know exactly where exactly to use it. I think that's where another problem I found. Go to any board meeting of top hospitals, they say more technology users, but they don't know exactly where. Some of the cases have to be identified. And there we need somebody who does that as a professional job. We are talking to KPMGs of the world. They said, why don't you come and help out in this process? What is the right way to go, adaptation of the solution? Other problem is that hospitals don't directly want to talk to the startups. They say, oh no, we need somebody else in the middle to come and talk to us. Just talking directly to a startup.
Let me just ask you. So is there are there hospitals on your board for the IoT incubator who talk to these startups?
Right now, no. Okay. But we are in the process of setting it up. We are only a few months old when it comes for the center that we have, for the IoT. And very soon, in a couple of months, you will see, beginning of January, you will see that happening. I was talking to Prasad also, on this, and then we need, active participation from all the players to make that happen. We know this is going to happen, but it rather happen in a smooth manner than haphazard way of, where we run into problems, discover, and then find solutions. So
because that is Doc's biggest problem today. Now, when you get KPMG to advise you on the product roadmap,
not on the product roadmap, but easy adoption of solutions.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And one of the things which we consciously felt at our hospital was to create this role of a CMIO who would meet startups, discuss with startups. I think in this audience, I can handpick 2 or 3 startups which Manipal is working with. So the CMIO role actually bridges that gap between technology and healthcare. And we look at, from a doctor's perspective, what is going to be useful for me. And also from the management perspective, saying that it is a financially viable model.
Right.
So I think that particular role of CMIO will bridge the issue between doctors and startups.
Absolutely. So these roles do exist. Actually, I know in Apollo that I met that person. So we are in the process of reaching out to all these people now.
Oh,
right in front of you.
And you're mentioning Apollo in front of Manipal.
There's room for
Arvind is a good friend, but still. So Sanjeev, this is a valid point Doc brings out.
Yeah.
Sanjeev also adheres to it.
Yeah.
That how are you working on? I know I think you have direct access to a lot of hospitals. Right. But how involved are they in your roadmap, especially when it comes to things like IoT and AI?
So if you start looking at the role of collaboration, if you start looking at the fact that you can't put the cart before the horse, you have to know what the problem is. I think if you look at some of the solutions that we are creating, if I look at India in particular, if you look at the example that Prasad mentioned on EICU and the intelligence that is there, we built it together with the hospital. Dr. Verma was there. We've been close collaborators with many of the healthcare providers in building that solution. And that's when you get it right. The second thing is, if you start looking at what we are doing in North America with the number of the luminaries in terms of looking at how do you bring in AI. Now, if you start looking at the need to influence the fact that you want adoption of, say, IoT, AI, you really have to tackle it via collaboration, both with the industry and also with the regulation and a number of bodies that come into play. So correct. Indeed, that's very significant in the way we are trying to address the problem. In the HealthSuite digital platform that we have, all of the propositions that are being built on top of it is in some form of a collaboration with some hospital or care provider.
Okay, that's a good point. So John, coming back to you, you started this discussion, this thread at least. So how much of collaboration do you see with mainstream hospitals? Because you're trying to help them, right, in a way.
Right.
You're a wellness provider, but you're trying to help them in a way. So how much collaboration is there, and what do you see are the challenges, because you don't want to step into each other's toes.
Right. I'll start with the problem that we had, right? To build, what we do is use data, build analytics on top of it, machine learning on top of it, and give insights to our users. Now you need a seed data set. How do you get to the seed data? Are we talking about hundreds of millions of data points? And we had to start with that data. So we first considered collaborating with hospitals and medical institutions to get that data. But we realized that's going to be a laborious process, right? How do you, being a 3-member startup sitting out of Bangalore, how do you go reach out to all the hospitals and gather critical seed set of data to build your model on? It just looked too difficult. And so we decided to go to the users first. Hey, can we build something that will let the users themselves seed the data first? So we went to the users first, and that got us started with the seed set. Today we have more than 100 million data points with real-time data pertaining to women's cycles, related symptoms, basal body temperature, weight, which they enter onto the platform. And we built our analytical models on top of it. I couldn't see us doing the same thing, building partnerships. It would have taken us a lot of time, right? The amount of time, effort, or even the money that we have invested in to get to this point is very, very minimal. And we've been a 4-member team until 6 months ago. Now we've expanded. That's how we use technology to sort of circumvent the initial problems that we had. But going forward, like I explained earlier, what do you do, or how does the data become actionable to the user? Let's say we could inform the user, you know what, you're 25, your cycle's following a certain pattern, your symptoms following a certain pattern. You might want to watch out for thyroid-related disorder because you have data from 100,000 other users. We can stop there, right? How do you make this data actionable? That's when a healthcare professional comes in. So I think a great way for us to collaborate is, can we get doctors or hospitals or institutions to come on board onto the platform? Now, use the data and thereby add value to the user. Can our users interact with the doctors right on the platform because the data is here? Those are ways where we believe there could be a lot of value add to our users, and these institutions bring in skill sets which we don't have. At the end of the day, we are still engineers. We're not medical professionals, right? So, and that's one way we feel that we could collaborate, but we haven't gotten to that point where we have started collaborating. We have just started discussions with a few hospitals asking, can this data be valuable? There has been some pushback. I've had gynecs telling me, I've survived without this data for 25 years. I'm good, right?
No, and that's natural, right?
Right, and so there is some amount of cell involved to help the doctors understand what is that we're trying to do, because there is always that question, okay, are you trying to use technology? Uber did that, right? One fine day, nobody expected Uber to do what it did at the beginning, but today it's just disrupted transportation all over the world. And the next step is saying, drivers are going to be replaced with computer software to drive these vehicles. So there is some amount of suspicion when you talk about technology and how you use technology, but I really think that if we all were in this together, the amount of value add to the user can be tremendous.
I agree.
And we will have to build that trust, mutual trust. Now, how do we go about that is something which we'll have to figure out. And I'm hoping right after this session to reach out to people on this panel. I see there are a lot of ways we could be collaborating. That's something which we'll have to figure out. So until this point, we have not collaborated with hospitals in a big way. Our collaboration has been limited to our discussions with doctors while we built the analytical models that we did, right? Because at the end of the day, it had to be medically valid.
No, that's a good point. So, Dr. Chandra, going to you,
Yes.
Let's move away from IoT. I think a lot has been said about IoT since morning, and security and everything.
Yeah.
Machine learning.
Yeah.
Organizations like Librate or Healthify Me or some of the other startups, they swear by it because it helps you give contextual, personalized, offering.
Yeah.
How does that work in the enterprise at the hospital level? How do you see machine learning evolving?
I'll come back to my bread and butter, what's in oncology. Good example. Here we have it in India, right now working for a hospital. We have number of implementations in APAC itself. I think, like you said, it's deeply contextual. It can work on patterns. It can derive insights on the big data that is being generated from the IoT devices to various other sources, the medical records and all of that. While the startups are focusing on one area of the entire healthcare spectrum, like you just said, the reproductive health, or there are some that we work with today that focus on ophthalmology and stuff like that. I think the platform that we built, it can be used by the enterprises and the startups equally well, right? You can take it and customize it to the need. We have something called Watson Health Core, which provides you API level access to various health functions, if you may call them, right? To deal with the particular business problem that they're trying to solve in the healthcare field. So I think how it works for hospitals versus the startups doesn't change, in my view.
So basically, you're saying that it's somewhat of a level playing field.
Yes.
It depends on your
Absolutely,
need and
absolutely, yeah.
solution.
Oncology is a specific flavor of that because that is such a dreaded area in healthcare, right? We specifically wanted to build a solution to help solve that problem. It is like IBM sending the first set of man to moon, right? We wanted to do that first. That's a particular flavor of what AI or machine learning can do. But then we have the core, which is built out in a way which looks like another API for any user.
Just hold that thought. So, Doc, basically what these gentlemen have been telling me is that you can be replaced in about 20 years' time.
I'll put my money on this, and in this open platform, I'm going to predict that at least in the next 5 years, doctors are going to be there, machines will not replace it. I'm going to put my money on that.
Are you worried about the 20-year prediction?
Not really, not really. Doctors can not be replaced.
Let me reframe the question,
Right.
Doc. I think it's a wrong question. So, you make so many decisions, right? Acute care, accident cases, emergency. I don't think those can be replaced anytime near future, but, am I going the wrong track?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Where I see it 20 years down the line, unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can make a fairly good assumption that between what has happened in the last 5 years to what is going to happen in the next 20 years, you'll see an entire generation of people who will have data sets, which is evidence-based medicine, coming to a doctor and saying that getting a doctor's opinion, and the doctor also will have access to the data sets, and so that is where the democratization of healthcare is going to happen. Will it, I think in the earlier discussion, there was a thing that you get it for second opinion, then it comes to first opinion. Honestly, think that is something which is not going to happen. This was predicted, something like Bitcoin, it is going to replace banks. It didn't happen. I don't think it's going to see the light of the day. But what it will definitely do, it is going to democratize healthcare. The patients will be more empowered. If patient X has got a certain kind of a malignancy or a cancer, they will know what is the best treatment option. And that is something which we're doing at the hospital right now. We can actually tell them what is the global best practice. Do they have to have radiotherapy or chemotherapy? Number two, we can actually tell them what is your 5-year survival, what is your 10-year survival based on the rates. And exclusive to our hospital, we can also tell them the cost of treatment. So they have the benefit of choosing based on these data sets. And the advantage of that is whether you come to Bangalore, whether you go to Royal Free Hospital in London or MSK, the advice is going to be the same. If you take the next step forward, somebody has to do the surgery. Yes, you have the Da Vinci system which can do the surgery, but the Da Vinci is again manned by a person. So I think what we are seeing is a situation where you have accessibility to data, and even the doctors will have access to that data. And then you can come to a conclusion. I think the days of the doctors saying my way or the highway is gone.
It's over. So it's kind of changed the paradigm to a great extent.
So I think just want to make a point there. So the initial statement that you made, I think I agree with you, although I'm from the other side of the boundary. Doctors will be there, but the part that I disagree is the machines will be gone. They will be. I think they will evolve.
No, I said machines will be.
Right? And they will help augment the doctor's capacity and the capability to see more and more patients, more evidence-based decisions making. The bias will go out of the picture.
Excellent. So, Sanjeev, machines are going to be there. They're going to help the doctors. What is it do you think is missing right now? Why aren't startups able to crash those timelines? What I see is a lot of startups inspired by Silicon Valley. And I see a lot of startups that are still struggling, like my friend here, to get access to the right kind of help. What do you think is what is the gap? What are we missing?
Yeah. There is no one thing that I can pinpoint to that's holding it back. I mean, there are multiple things, that I can think, on the fly that I can think. As somebody said in the morning session also, Indians generally are late adopters of technology, We say, okay, rest of the world has tried, it's working well in US, working well in UK, now let's do it here, I know that. That's a general thing. And in America, I've seen, people would want to try out things. At the worst, what will happen? It will not work, it will fail, you lose some money, that's the worst. But if it works, you see a lot of advantage coming out of it. That's the same factor I'm seeing in industrial side also, not only in healthcare. People look at traditional ways of working out the ROIs and this and that. And the process takes so long that things move forward by then. Second thing is, I think what we are trying to do is to bring more awareness among the people on every. So that's where I said I've been building an ecosystem where we get people, the consumers of the technology as well as the suppliers of the technology, the tech companies and the government and the academia. So everybody has to be there so they kind of understand each other more, and then we show them what the global trends are and what the advantages you can get out of it. So we'll play some role in that for the adoption of that. Some system integrators also need to come in who take the startup. Startup may not have wherewithal to go into every hospital. They are anyway short on cash. Or the one they have is already targeted for specific development activity. We definitely need to bring out the advantages of some of those things. And thirdly, startups also have to do things which are targeted for India. You can't things that develop at a global level and say, now I'll use it in India. Needs of India are different from what needs in the rest of the world is. I mean, some people do lament about it in the government that we do something for this. They come and talk to me, yeah, ye technology theek hai, but aam aadmi ke liye kya kiya aapne? That is what they're asking me. So I don't have a clear answer on some of those things. So we have to have way to help out some of those startups, have a special funding either from the government or some of the CSR funds from the enterprise. That let's encourage some of these enterprises who are actually going to reach out to ground level, but they don't make so much commercial value. They don't see out of it right away. So these are the few things that come to my mind. We definitely need to do from our end, and probably all of us as a together.
Well, that's an interesting point. I've somehow felt that adoption of technology by India was accelerating. Shiva, any perspective from you? Are we late adopters? I mean, I see...
Traditionally speaking, things are changing in generally. Yeah.
But what is your experience? Suppose you build something new and cool. Will you find Dr. Amarnath jumping in and saying, yes, I want this, or do you see the traditional resistance?
So conventionally, if you look at healthcare is a bit of a late adopter of technology per se. But I think that if you have a solution to the problem, like Dr. Amarnath was saying, I think there will be a lot of enthusiasm in terms of wanting to adopt it. I don't see a challenge with that. And just going back to the earlier point, what do we need to do to enable startups? I think the couple of things is if you start looking at the availability of the data. I mean, principally, if you want to build a model or if you want to do anything of that sort, you need to be able to train the model, you need the data. That is fundamental. And how do you make the data available? Because traditionally the data belongs to the patient, and we need to see what we could choose to do to make data available to the startups so that they have a mechanism to actually test what they're trying to do. And that's where I go back to the collaboration element. The other thing I wanted to mention, at least from the previous question, is that when you start looking at healthcare or oncology, and when it comes to machines and man in particular, most of these diseases, like if you look at oncology, you can live with it for quite a long period of time. And in terms of the lifespan that can be there and the question is the ability to establish context over a period of time and looking at a multitude of parameters before you take a decision. And the fact that the artificial intelligence systems will have to come to recognize the universality of context in delivering care, in looking at lab images. There's no one thing that you can look at to necessarily draw inference, which the human is naturally trained to do.
So, Ramachandra, coming back to you, yes, there is a problem. If technology, may it be artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT solves it, people will adopt. Healthcare is no different. So what is the, what is the big gap then? Are you seeing a similar challenge of not being able to put the right solution? Or is it, like, why would anybody adopt, machine learning without having a use case? Or do we need a use case before it's adopted? So it's a chicken and egg story, right? How did you overcome that?
I think you answered that question already by saying the use case. Sometimes in the software world, like Pramod was talking about in the morning panel discussion, unless you back it up with the right architecture for the purpose, you end up building what's called the Frankenstein's monster for the problem. So to define the right use cases for which you can actually use this technology is very important. Otherwise, you will just end up making it more expensive and prohibitive for others to adopt. The other challenge that we have, and if you're talking about India, specifically India healthcare market, is the cost. Now, mind you, one of the speakers in the morning talked about Manipal spending a small fortune in using Watson Oncology.
Which is true, right?
Yeah, so we in IBM, we don't agree with that. right? Because we are on the other side. We
It
know
was not
what
big.
it is.
It was not big enough.
No, it was not big enough. So, but then we want to work in India, given like the parameters that I just mentioned. The oncologist to patient ratio is 1:1600. So therefore, compared to a WHO recommended standard of 1 to 1000, let's say, right? So therefore, the problem is more acute. Therefore, unfortunately, for a solution like Watson Oncology, the market is India, like Ravi Guru Raj was talking about. That's a big factor. These solutions are not cheap. They are expensive. It needs to be adopted, it needs to be contextualized, it needs to be localized, and it needs to be marketed for the India market, where you're looking to bring down the cost all the time. I don't think anybody has any inhibition towards using technology from the hospitals that we have spoken to. We have almost spoken to every single big hospital in India right now for our solutions. Most of the time, first factor is cost, right? Second is the fear of not realizing the ROI, because not many hospitals, like one that I heard in the morning, that are non-profit. They're trying to make money. So when do they realize their ROI? So whoever is building this kind of solutions, I don't think they know what they're doing. It's not a case of they're trying to misfit a solution into a wrong problem. I think it's a question of how to make that cost attractive to them, how to make adoption faster. For example, some of the doctors, they don't want to, all of these systems require a lot of input data to work with. That's where their success is. Most of the doctors are, they don't want to enter data. They don't want to do the clerical job of, how is the machine going to know?
Computerized
Right?
physician
So
ordering.
what bridges do you put in between, right, for them to feed that data into the cognitive systems or the AI-based systems to make those decisions or come out with a few decision-making points for you? Those kind of adoption challenges are far and few, in the West, whereas it is quite a lot in India, we see. A lot of the doctors that we speak to today in India, they're very resistant to saying, I'm not going to spend my time entering data into that, right? So I think these are some of the challenges: cost, adoption, and the right solutioning for the right purpose. I think these three.
So, okay,
Just to add to what
Yeah.
was already spoken, right? I think also from a startup standpoint, there are so many technologies involved, and how many of these do you adopt, right? And here's this one app or product which is targeted at gynecology. Now we're talking about oncology, and there are hundreds of these, and I would dare say, none of this data is standardized, right? And then how do you make sense of this data? Do you rely on all 100 of these solutions for different problems? And how do you make sense of this data? If you talk about AI, like he pointed out, the data is important, and the ability to correlate data is important. You can capture all of this data, but at the end of the day, if you can't make sense out of it by looking at it as a whole, it really won't work, or it won't be as effective as it should be. So there is no standardization, one. And also, if you talk about AI from a decision-making standpoint, what does that mean from a regulatory standpoint? Where does the accountability lie now? There is a certain gray area there, as I would see it. So even in the efforts that we make it very, very clear, at least to our users, that we're not going to make any decision for you. You take the decision, and you are accountable for it, right? But that's taking the easy road. For it to be really effective, there needs to be clarity on how that would work, right? What is the regulatory framework in which all of this data is being aggregated, and what kind of decision-making systems are built on top of it, and how does that fit into the regulatory framework? There needs to be clarity on that as well.
I partially agree with you. I mean, because CDSS has existed for a while, and it falls under HIPAA, conforms to HL7, so that has been done. So what I'm hearing is, I don't want to talk too much about architecture and standards, because I think a lot has been discussed since morning. But what about change management? Do you think this is a change management issue? Artificial intelligence is available, IoT is available, machine learning is available, but is there change management required?
Absolutely.
Even on part of the administrators of not how to calculate ROI, maybe the way we are calculating ROI is wrong, or is it more about, and it also includes change management with the physicians. What do you think, Doc? Let's start with you. So do you have to be incentivized to type in your prescriptions?
You have to see that as an opportunity. In the sense that, yes, as doctors, all we want to do is treat the patient. Don't expect us to enter data. And that's where you need to see an opportunity. And I think we have seen an opportunity. I think one of the partners whom we're working with is here in the audience, Dr. Randeep and his team from DocSpa. So what they've done for us is to, the most favored technology that a physician has is something which was patented in 1888 by John Loud, which is a ballpoint pen.
Excellent.
So that is the best technology that we can use. So how are you going to use that inherent inertia in a doctor and then convert that into an opportunity? And how are we going to use that to enter data? So there are people who are doing that. DocSpa and Dr. Randeep and his team are doing that. So you need to see that as an opportunity.
Sure.
So that's number one. Number two is in terms of, you said about the regulatory issues. There's no doubt about that. Everything has to be HIPAA compliant. And as a doctor and as a hospital group, we are medico-legally bound to keep that data for about 5 years. And that is something which is the onus is on us to maintain that data. So I think wherever you see the change management issue, doctors not doing something, I think you need to see that as an opportunity and build a product or a solution out of that. Yes, change management is an issue because we are not technologists, so we want to treat patients. And how is technology going to make my life easier rather than making it more harder? And I think the takeaway point is make our lives easier. And if there's a pain point, use that as an opportunity.
Correct. So coming to you, do you think ROI is a problem? The way we traditionally calculate ROI?
That's an interesting question because I think corporations are driven in a certain way and corporations are evaluated in a certain way. That doesn't change. And we function in the bounds of how we are evaluated as a corporation. I think this is where the aspect of ROI will have to be looked at, particularly if you look at India.
Correct.
You'll have to have things like the government actually step in to enable the ROI. If you leave it just to the corporations will be driven by the conventional modes of looking at ROI and quarter to quarter and what the stock market has to say. There's a long haul about anything that you want to do in healthcare. And if the government can then enable this via regulation, for example, if you see what Obama did in America and you see in the last 8 to 10 years, the significant adoption of EMRs in America, that was principally because of the introduction of regulation coupled with incentive. And if you now look at ROI separately, and if we start introducing regulation and then couple it with the incentive because you are adopting something, that is a model that can make a difference in the way ROI is looked at. If not, people will remain straitjacketed in the way they evaluate ROI. That's my view.
Excellent point. So do you mean that the schemes like what the special advisor spoke about,
yes,
the insurance scheme, that could spur the next round of...
At a much larger scale, I think the making a significant change in healthcare is a multi-decade affair. Now, if the government lays a plan out and says that we insist on the adoption of EMRs or the EHR, and it's not, what tends to happen is that there's adoption first in government hospitals. But if they say, no, this adoption has to happen all across India, they introduce a regulation or an act that everybody has to now adopt EHRs, and you put down a calendar, and then they start incentivizing it, and then you can use the wallet, and you can use whatever ways to incentivize hospitals, incentivize individuals, because the individual is incentivized to make available his data for the larger use of AI, for example, as an illustration. You can link everything together in trying to see how you can use digital to enable and improve care.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So I think in hospitals, it is little, in the healthcare area, it's a little more difficult. In industrial side, I can induce some fear. I do that when I meet them, that if you don't do it, somebody from outside will come and, eat your lunch. Or you will be behind. But here they know the patient has to come to this hospital, or no hospital from outside will come and take away their lunch. So that fear doesn't exist. But I think the onus lies on the startups to come and show the value. And that value, then I can take it to them and they say, see, this is the value. Of course, doctors, are continuing the things as they are. For them, it has to be something that really helps them reduce their time or improve it or whatever that be the case. They should see some value. But I think the main onus lies on the startups to yeah, I'm sure hospitals will start adopting it.
So, Doc, one important point he brought up, which I've been very curious about. Manipal is a traditional I mean, you are the pioneers of healthcare in many ways with your medical institutions, and you're a traditional hospital. And all of a sudden, and I've asked this question to a few other folks, but first time to a Manipal person, is why this sudden rush? Because if somebody had told me that Manipal will adopt AI, a hospital in India will adopt AI, I can think of a few names. Out of respect for you, I won't name them. But it wouldn't be Manipal. But what happened? What is it that got into the philosophy of Manipal to suddenly take this on?
I think if you look at the entire healthcare ecosystem, things moved from infectious diseases to non-infectious or non-communicable diseases or lifestyle diseases. The same way, technology is here to stay. There is no doubt about that. And medicine is the holy grail for technology. And what we essentially saw is that how are we going to best use this technology to be the leader than be the follower, number one. Number two, it all goes into the mindset of who's the decision maker. Fortunately, we have the owner who's very well versed with technology and who wants to move it in that direction. You have a team like 4 or 5 of us who are driving this. And just to put that ROI into context, we are not charging anything for the patients. Despite whatever we've paid IBM, this is free of cost for the patient. So we see the ROI not in actual, what the patient pays because we're giving it free of cost, but in terms of what long-term value we are bringing to both the institution and to the patient. So I think to answer your question of why technology, one, we know that if you don't adapt, you're going to be a dinosaur. There's no doubt about that. And number two, healthcare is where, I'll give you a context of oncology. You have about 120 new papers published in oncology per day. And you have about 15 million pages of data related to one particular cancer. Humanly, for a doctor, it's not impossible to keep up to date. And if there's something which is helping us keep up to date.
Ingest that information.
Yeah, if it's something which I can use to corroborate my diagnosis and my treatment, I'll be happy to use that. So when you ask why Manipal, I think number one, we tend to see the trends, and number two, it's the leadership.
I thought you would say it's because of Bangalore. It's in the air, right? I mean, technology is in the air here.
So the takeaway from this is you can scare hospitals too. Tell them to go adopt technology or somebody will eat your lunch. So at this point, we're ready to take questions from the audience. Please keep it to the context of this panel discussion. IoT, artificial intelligence, I see a first hand go up here.
You've said a lot about the aspects of data and that hospitals have it. IBM Watson is privileged to work with Manipal to get that data, right? And I think startups, on the other hand, don't get access to any of that data. You
Correct.
need to forge that partnership to be able to even get access to any of that data. So I just want to understand what hospitals feel about working with startups and sharing that data.
Let me clarify. IBM, whatever data is generated out of that, it is the data of Manipal. It is not something which we're giving it to IBM. Let's be very clear on that. And as I told the moderator that in the morning I was itching to get in the conversation where there's the issue of data security. I mean, we are the ones who take data security at the highest level. Primarily because data confidentiality, when we trained in UK, that was one of the teaching points in medical school. But here, data security is something which is unknown. And to put it in context, I can tell you, you might be seeing Top Gear, one of those BBC car shows. So one of the presenters had a major head injury and had come into our hospital. And, human beings are inquisitive. So one of the doctors wanted to see what exactly the MRI showed. And he or she was not a part of the treatment team. And as soon as they got to know that this doctor is accessing that data, he was put on suspension. So that's how serious data security breach is. And that's the level of data security we are bringing at Manipal and IBM. So when we say that data security, when you say that startups don't have access to the data, nobody has access to the data. It is a proprietary information of the hospital and the patient. And nobody else has access to that one. So I think if it's a myth that if it's a giant corporation who's able to access our data, I will dispel that myth. That's not the case.
But somewhere I think we had a similar discussion when we were talking about smart cities also. Data should be made available to startups, I believe. Otherwise, it will limit the innovation. Now, data we can remove the privacy from the data, When I say privacy, I mean we remove the name. You can remove my, keep my gender, age, background, the areas which I live. And, yeah, and then keep it open for startups because they need this data to validate few of their algorithms.
No, I don't think I would agree on that because, when a patient comes into the hospital, there is something called as the implied consent, which they sign. And the remit of that implied consent is that the data which is generated out of that patient has to be used only by that doctor to treat him. Now, if I need to do a clinical trial, I had clinical research for Manipal. So if I have to do a clinical trial where I need to access that data, I need to put in an application to the scientific review board, they have to clear it, then that goes to the ethical committee for review. Only once I get clearance from that, I can access that data. So when you say data is being generated and you share the data, healthcare is entirely different. You cannot access a patient's data just because you want to play around with numbers. There has to be a valid reason. You have to put it on paper. The scientific review board has to clear it. The ethics committee has to review it. Otherwise, everybody is in soup. So healthcare is totally different. So the data which is generated is entirely the patient's. And as somebody said, we are the custodians. I cannot give access to anybody and everybody unless it is for a particular reason like research, which has to follow the path.
Good point, Doc. I see a hand raised there. And just to your point, I think Manipal is working with a lot of startups.
Quite a few. I don't know whether Healthify Me is here, Praxify is here,
Healthify
Me was there.
I think you're working with far too many startups. I think you should give other hospitals a chance.
Well, as long as it's helping our patients. No, when I say, when you're working with startups, we need to see evidence that it is helping our patients. With the chronic disease management, lifestyle management, we're actually showing that we are helping them lose weight.
Correct.
And here we are showing them that you're getting the best oncology services across the world. And we are saying that, we are easing out doctors' issues of entering data by working with certain startups. So I think when we say we're working with a number of startups, we need to see that as an opportunity.
Correct. I agree with you. I think last year, if I remember clearly, the partner from Nexus Partners brought up the same point. Startups want data, but they should have a use case for it, to your point.
Absolutely.
And it should be useful for the hospital. Otherwise, why should the hospital share data when I can get into thousands of things?
Absolutely, yeah.
True, right?
Yeah,
Please
good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ramesh. I'm a radiologist. Actually, we've seen of late patients seeking second opinions, and most of them end up, uploading images through WhatsApp, the reports through WhatsApp. It's really a security concern. And secondly, they've all become very smart now. People come with requests through WhatsApp saying that I want this scan done, I want this thing to be done. So how do we address these issues?
Well,
Is it a serious breach of security?
I'll tell you on a lighter note, whatever you put up on WhatsApp is being used by Facebook to market to you. And
Yeah,
we have
that's
tried
fine.
this.
I'm
we've
talking
tried
of,
this a million
I'm
times,
talking
right?
of data integrity. Like people upload CT images, MR images, having personal data.
Sure, you want to take that on. I mean, it's more in your.
That's a real problem.
I wouldn't advise you to upload anything on WhatsApp.
No, but people upload it and then ask your opinion. So, Doc, I've uploaded this. Can you give me a second opinion? What do you do?
To answer that question, the onus is on the doctor.
Yeah, accountability is with us. The
Yeah,
law
the
is
onus
always
on us,
is going to take us
primarily-
to task.
Yeah,
It's
primarily
not going-
because if you see your registration, there is a jurisdiction of practice depending on your registration.
Yes.
So I have a registration with the General Medical Council and I can practice there. I have a registration with the Medical Council of India, so I can practice here. But say, for example, you receive a WhatsApp image from Tanzania. So I don't have a jurisdiction over there in terms of my registration. So that's the jurisdiction of practice. So whatever you say, you will be held liable if the patient sues, number one. Number two, I'll give you an example of what happened with FIFA. The FIFA executives who were arrested in Geneva by the FBI. So you can always say FBI doesn't have jurisdiction in Geneva. But the issue is, especially with healthcare, if you're using a platform or if you're using any service, the server which is based in US, you are liable to US laws. So this actually happened to us when we were rolling out Watson. We wanted to roll out Watson for the entire patient population. But we were very clear that we don't want it to be an open-ended system. And we wanted the geography to be defined, saying that unless you're a patient in India, only then you can access Watson. So here what happens is, I as a doctor need to know what my limitations are based on my jurisdiction of registration. And it's up to the patient, and they need a lot of education to say that whatever they upload on social media, that is accessible by everyone. But I think it's a doctor's prerogative.
Maybe somewhere we need to, direct innovation such that such things do not happen because of this. A bane of technology, actually.
That's a great point, actually. Very good point on jurisdiction. One last question from the gentleman there. He has been very patient so far.
I mean, you had talked about the data belonging to the patient. So, as a government, isn't there any effort to actually ask the hospitals to give an option that the data can be made available on a central platform for either academic research or for startups? I mean, why isn't there an option there to the patient? So, I mean, he should be able to make that decision. I mean, the patient is the one spending his money, and I mean, he should have an option to make it open to the...
See, this happens in clinical trials, where you're coming in particularly for your data, which can be used for experimental purposes. But then I'll put it this way. So when you come into the hospital where the data is generated, so it is your data and we are the custodian. So that is how it works. But if you want your data to be used by startups, that is an individual decision. We cannot have a blanket consent saying that all data which is generated in Manipal can be used for startups. I don't think that is going to happen. And ethically, it is not right for me to do that. And I'll tell you why ethically. There are certain platforms which are using this data and then coordinating with insurance companies. What that happens is, say for example, even if it's anonymized data, I will be able to know that Bangalore, I'm telling you a case in point, Bangalore will have, say, the highest number of diabetics as compared to Mysore. So when you apply for your insurance, health insurance in Bangalore, your insurance rates are going to skyrocket. And that is not fair on a non-diabetic person. So it's very unfair for us as doctors or as hospital groups to share this data with third-party providers unless it is for specific research purposes which has to follow through. So it's a very dangerous trend, and I think that has to be nipped in the bud.
Okay, I think...
if I may just to...
Yeah, please.
So there are two aspects. There's what doctor mentioned, which I think is implied consent, and informed consent in terms of the fact that, and I go back to the point that if the government comes up with, like the DOT or one of the departments comes up with a program, and then you have collaboration happening between institutions, startups, and then you can have the patient informed consent in terms of the patient saying, do you want to become part of this program? And then at that moment, the data can be made available. So it meets all of what Dr. Amarnath was saying, and it can also meet the need you have. But there has to be that momentum created, and I personally feel that regulation and the government and subsidy around that can make a big difference to accelerate that process.
Excellent. I think that's a great point. So I think that's all the time we have today for this panel. Thank you very much for your time. All of you are busy professionals trying to push healthcare to the next level. Just to summarize, we agreed on a lot of things. We agreed that artificial intelligence is making a big difference. IoT is making a big difference, helping clinicians improve outcomes, and you've clearly proven that. We also agreed that security is an important point, cannot be taken lightly, which is somewhat different from the earlier panel which said, I don't care about security as long as I have access. We also feel that cost is becoming a big problem. Probably it's the way we calculate ROI, it's the way physicians and clinical and paraclinical staff approach technology as a problem. Startups can be an answer to a lot of those questions. Startups have to push the boundaries, but obviously startups are constrained by lack of data. So organizations like NASSCOM are helping to create that collaborative environment. And finally, data can't be shared. I have not heard of a much more detailed discussion on data. I think the entire panel could have been about data. But thank you all. And thank you all for being a wonderful audience. With that, we'd like to close the panel discussion.
Thank you so much to the moderator as well as our panelists.